good afternoon. I am really honored to be here and to share a bit of my crazy and special and gratifying journey with you, which is really about home. It is about finding my way home. It's about figuring out what is home. And it all began quite a long time ago. In 1993, almost 25 years ago now, I began buying and collecting signs from people on the streets. Like a lot of you, perhaps, I felt awkward and uncomfortable when I saw someone holding a sign. I didn't know what to do. I really didn't like the way that I felt. Didn't like the fact that I was often ignoring them and trying to find a way to pretend I didn't see them. Now, over the years, I've bought lots and lots of signs. We'll talk more about that, but some of those signs are funny. This sign is from San Francisco. This sign is from Austin, Texas. I spent 20 minutes talking to this man on the street after buying this sign. What I've come to learn about all of these signs is that even the funny ones often have a pretty tragic story behind them. And one of the things I've learned about the people on the streets is that while I may initially want to judge them, the truth is there's a lot to learn about who they are as human beings. I bought these signs for many years, and it wasn't until I was in grad school much later that this turned into an art project for me. And in 2009, I had my first ever art show related to these signs. And at the time, I was gluing signs to mirrors. I was creating digital compilations from pieces and parts of signs, trying to figure out what the best way was to share this with the people that I came across. One of my favorite pieces from this series was simply the sweat-stained parts of the cardboard signs that didn't have words on them at all. And this was, for me, just became a huge project. I was in grad school at the time. One of my classmates was photographing the places under bridges where people actually slept. And I went with her a couple of times and experienced that discomfort of seeing those places where people slept. I organized a couple of events while I was in school where I'd get 30 or 40 of my closest friends, and we would go stand out near Mockingbird and Central and hold homeless signs until people pulled up to ask what we were doing. We would hand out cards to them, which directed them to a blog I was maintaining at the time, telling them about the project and also shelters and places they could volunteer. The very last time I did that particular project, we had the bright idea to put our URL on dollar bills and hand those out, and the cops came and I found out you can't give money away on the street. There are a lot of rules you have to follow when you are on the street, and so I got pretty good at that. But anyway, this project continued to teach me so many things, and it really wasn't until I was finishing grad school that I really got it, that it was the signs themselves that had the power and that I really didn't need to do much. This actually is the exhibit that Christine referenced at One Arts Plaza, one of many that I've done that were covering walls. I've done exhibits this was in an abandoned house and got to cover an entire room floor with signs. I've done pretty much, one of the things that I love about the art project of We Are All Homeless, which is what I called this beginning in grad school, is that I get to design the installation for whatever space it happens to be. And sometimes that is on a floor or on a wall, but sometimes it may be that I get to suspend the signs and that they take up space, and I get to watch as people walk among them and experience what their stories are inside their heads. But for me, this has been a journey that continues to teach me to be grateful on a daily basis. In 2012, I did my first really big talk about this project, and it was at that time that I connected this entire thing to my relationship with my dad. My dad, like a lot of men of his generation, was like John Wayne. He did not know how to manage his anger. He took it out on us, on my mom and me and my 7 siblings. And so I grew up terrified. And what I didn't know until I did this talk was 1993, I buy my first homeless sign. That's the same year that I write what I now call the Come to Jesus letter to my dad, which was the letter where I told him I wasn't going to be scared of him anymore, that I was going to change the way I wanted to be in the world. I wasn't going to be like him. And you know, as Clay said earlier, the blowing up without any ability to regulate that, I had that same thing inside me. So this was a big turning point. Another thing that happened when I was in doing this talk is that I mentioned off the top of my head that one day I wanted to travel across the country and buy homeless signs. Now I said it kind of as a lark, then I realized that talk's online now, people can see that, so I better actually do it. And 2 years later, we began to map out a journey across the country. And this became another important step on this journey of We Are All Homeless. We decided to go from Seattle to New York in 31 days, buying homeless signs and making a documentary about this process. And I want to share a little piece of that journey. I want to share a few of the signs. Seattle, San Francisco, Philly, Chicago. This was from about a 70-year-old guy in Los Angeles who was just hilarious. And again, another example of entertaining signs that often had a serious story behind them. One of the signs that had the most impact on me was from a guy named Michael in Las Vegas, and all it said was spare change. But this was done with a ballpoint pen on a piece of cardboard, and we interviewed him for the documentary. We met and interviewed over 120 people for this film, and talking to him and hearing the pain in his voice, for me, that made this sign have a lot of meaning. There were a lot of people that we met, and I'm going to show you just a few here, but we met Owen in Portland. Owen said he showed up in Portland with 63 Sharpies, and by the time we met him, he said he was down to his last 3 because he'd given them to his friends. One of the things that impressed me about him is that he was taking care of this guy, whose name is Paulie. Paulie had some kind of mental illness, and I don't think would be able to survive without Owen helping him, giving him a piece of pizza or a meal whenever he had some spare money. I met Neil in San Francisco, who turns out was a songwriter. His wife had just passed away. He was a veteran. He pulled out his notebook with his music on it, and I'm not enough of a musician to know anything about it, but he was really proud of it. He also had to cart around an oxygen tank. Chaz Kyle I met in Denver. He and another guy were train hoppers, and I got to hear a lot about the secret life of people who hop trains for a living. Danelle, 78 years old, was living in a park in Albuquerque and told me that she one day was going to hopefully win the lottery, and she was going to start a homeless shelter called Pets with People, because the reason she stayed in a park in Albuquerque is because she had 2 cats, and she was not going to go without her cats, and that's one of the reasons people stay out on the street. Michael was a man I met in Omaha, Nebraska, and in some ways had the most profound effect on me from this trip. He was missing a limb. A friend of mine had recently passed away who was also missing a limb, and I don't know if it was that connection or the fact that we were about the same age, but he talked about the fact that he was a veteran, and he and a group of almost a dozen Native Americans would share all of the money and stuff that they got with each other when they got money on the street. And he really had a profound impact on me. I'm about to show you a video. It's a short clip from one of the guys we interviewed for the documentary. So this is Robert.
My wife passed away of breast cancer. I had no insurance. Couldn't keep the mortgage up, and it was just a matter of time. You know, you wake up one morning and you got the sheriff putting a tape on your door saying you have to leave today. I'm just so thankful my children are grown, because you know, what would I do out here if I had my 3 boys and they were still 8, 9, and 10 years old? What would I do? Yeah, I feel like there's no end. I mean, I know there is. Some days you feel hopeless, some days you don't. My philosophy on life is if you wake up, that should be the hardest part of your day, when you wake up. The rest of the day should be easy because the good Lord's given you another day to do whatever. But yeah, there's days you feel hopeless and trapped, but then there's days you feel hope and you think that maybe you're going to turn the corner.
So I've learned so many things from the people on the streets, and one of the things that I learned from men like Robert is that they are still in angst about their families and the children that they have or no longer have connections to. I met Cheryl in Detroit. She still to this day is the only person who was so excited that I wanted to pay her money for her sign that she reached inside the car window and hugged my neck. And she's called me several times. I also make the mistake of sometimes giving out my cell phone number. And she has called me a number of times asking for additional money. But she was one of the brightest lights that we met on this trip. And the youngest person that we met is Ellie. Met her in Baltimore. She was a Romanian, spoke 5 languages, and was living with her family in a small 1-bedroom place. She has since been deported back and is living with a band of gypsies in Romania and is about to give birth. I know this because Michelle, the woman in the camouflage hat, was taking care of her and had taken her under her wing. But a really bright, amazing young woman, someone I never expected to encounter on the streets. And the last person I'll show you from this trip was Nigel, who was displaced to New York after Katrina happened in Louisiana. He wanted to be a writer, and he read us bits from his journal. Just a young man who told us stories of what it's like to be on the street and have people give him a blanket so that he could sleep at night. The ripples is, of course, why this project continues and what I love so much about it. And there have been so many ripples from this project that I'm going to share a few with you, but I promise you I had no idea that I would be doing this 25 years after I bought that first sign. For me, this was a harebrained idea, but it's turned into something, and I'm trying to stay open and pay attention to where it leads me. The first thing has been the amount of media attention that happened, most of which ramped up when we were traveling across the country. By the time we got to Washington, D.C., I got to do an interview on All Things Considered and got to go to the home offices of NPR, just something I never dreamed would have happened, and it was all because of this project. Upward, they uploaded this short video about this project, which went viral almost immediately. It's now been seen over 6.4 million times. But this has opened a lot of doors to exhibits around the world. And again, ripples and eyeballs that I just never imagined that I was going to get to see. These are just a few of the places I've gotten to do exhibits, but because of the connections and the word of mouth, this has led to 2 exhibits in the UK this past year. And in 2016, got to do exhibits at both the Democratic and Republican national conventions, that's another long story. Our documentary was finally completed, and we're hoping that it will soon become available to the public. Right now, we're still in the film festival circuit. But that was another part of this process and this journey that I never had anticipated. I'd never made a feature-length film before, but it took us about 1.5 years of intense editing and pain. But it was just such a remarkable experience. The favorite part of this is that I get to share this with lots of different groups of people, and especially kids. Now, you can see I got to speak to the downtown cops in Dallas, and that was pretty cool because they deal with the homeless every single day. But it's really talking to young people who are not jaded yet, who have a passion for making change, who believe they can make change. And for me, that's the greatest piece of this whole thing, is to see them light up when I talk about this story. I spoke at a middle school in Dallas, Texas, and their teacher asked the students to come up with a plan to help me with my project. And she also said that I was going to have to judge their ideas, which made me think, oh gosh, now I get to disappoint a bunch of kids. But the kids with the winning idea said, we're going to make a video about your project and we're going to send it to Ellen DeGeneres. And these are photos of them making the video, which for me, just watching them make up stories and talking to Ellen as if they were, gonna literally, they're still editing this, by the way, they still haven't sent it off. But that to me is what the ripples of this project can turn into, is that they can inspire kids to come up with ideas, and they're gonna be the ones that are gonna solve this problem. It continues now, and sometimes that's in small ways and large ways. Just over the holidays, I spoke to this small group of young, underprivileged women in a group called Dream Angels. My friend in the red shirt mentors these young girls, and she just wanted them to be inspired and to let them get to see what kinds of things are happening out there in the world. By contrast, I'm going to show another short little time lapse right here, and this is at Art Prize in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And Art Prize, for those of you who don't know it, is the largest public art event in the world. 200,000 people in the span of 3 weeks went through this exhibit. I had so many conversations with complete strangers, many of whom would walk up to me in tears just from having read the signs. But I had never done anything on this scale before. So it continues in ways big and small. These are recent signs over the past couple of months. Someone mailed me the Happy Hungry Holidays sign from Florida. There are people now that send me signs from all over the country, and I get to hear their stories of the person that they met. The most recent high school I spoke to, and the most homeless signs I've ever put in my car at one time, was at Ennis High School. And the teacher had seen our documentary on KERA, asked if I would come and share this with the students. And again, this photograph, which was taken of one of the students asking questions at the end, for me, this is what this project continues to be about, and seeing those kids and hearing their ideas just inspires me. This is a really bizarre recent experience happened where I was asked to be part of the Dallas Chamber Symphony. They were partnering with the Dallas Street Choir, which is a bunch of homeless folks that sing in a street choir who went to Carnegie Hall recently. But they were performing in conjunction with the Dallas Chamber Symphony, and I was asked to do an exhibit, but at the last minute they asked me to narrate some homeless poems while the symphony played. Fantastic experience for me, and this was us on Good Morning Texas, the conductor talking about this story. So this continues, and it's going to lead me to the final story that I want to share with you, and that's a story about a man named Eddie. Eddie was in Philadelphia when we were traveling across the country. And I bought his sign, and his sign said, "Something to ponder. What if God occasionally visits Earth disguised as a homeless guy, panhandling to see how charitable we are?" Completely hypothetical, of course. When I saw this sign, I knew I immediately liked this guy, Eddie. I asked him if he would be willing to sign a release so that we could interview him for the documentary. He said yes. And I'm going to show you a little bit of me asking him about this sign. So tell me a little bit about what was behind your sign.
I had a more generic sign prior to that, and I wanted to go in a different direction, like be a little innovative. So, I mean, you know.
But
I
how'd
guess-
you get the idea? I mean, where'd that come to you around?
It actually came to me, like, believe it or not, out of anger initially, because someone had said something derogatory towards me when I had asked them for money, and I came up with it in my head. I didn't think of it. I mean, I didn't say it to them, but I said, like, you know, for all you know, I'm God. Like, it's just, you know, checking to see if you know, how charitable people are, and if that's the case, you people are screwed, you know?
So you could see Eddie was a little beat up. He had some sores on his face. What I didn't know at the time was that Eddie was a heroin addict. He had come close to death a couple of times. He had been brought back by whatever that drug is they inject when you're about to die, but by the police a couple of times. Almost 2 years later, this is my cover photo on Facebook. You can see that Eddie's sign is behind me. This was from another talk about this project. And I get a Facebook message from some guy named Eddie Dunn. He says, "Hey man, you probably don't remember me, but you bought that sign for me in Philly." And I said, "Of course I remember you." And we start a Facebook conversation. He tells me that he has reunited with his 2 children. He's been sober for 1.5 years. He's sponsoring people in AA, and he just wanted me to know that he appreciated my project and to tell me what he was up to. So I, of course, was thrilled to reconnect with him. So I tell him that I was going to Philly for the Democratic National Convention. I said, "Hey, can we meet again? Can I buy you lunch?" And he said, "Yeah." So I picked him up at the train station. I took him to the exhibit, which was a big group show, and it turns out that his sign was in this exhibit. So I witnessed Eddie walking up and looking at these signs, and he began to weep, just remembering that part of his life. You could tell from this photo that he's put on about 40 pounds since then. He looked a lot healthier. He was still funny as hell. Eddie continues to be somebody that he's just a really special guy. What I learned about him too was that he had a brand new grandson. And this was at a panel discussion that we did in Philadelphia. But I want you to see some pictures of he and his grandson. This is one of the proudest grandpas I know. Now, he's almost always in his Wu-Tang shirt and his Philly Flyers cap. He is just full of life, but he is really trying to change the way he's impacting his kids and his grandson. This all culminated for me just over 1 year ago. I was asked to do another talk at SMU about this project, and I asked them if they would be willing to bring Eddie from Philadelphia to Dallas so that he could join me on stage. And they said yes. And so for the first time, I got to have someone join me on stage who could talk about what it was like to be behind one of those signs. He was able to talk about what it was like to have people throw change at him and say, "Get a job, you bum." The kinds of things that people do to other human beings on the street day in and day out. And he was able to humanize this in a way that I could never do. I mean, I can share stories, but it was very different to hear it from somebody who had been there. Eddie and I continue to be really close. And I'll share one last thing about that. But I want to finish with one other question, which is a question that I ask almost every time that I do an exhibit. I put up blank cardboard and Sharpies, and I ask people to answer this question. What I'm struck by is that the answers from the housed are so similar to the answers from those people on the street. So I want to show you one last clip, and this is toward the end of our documentary.
Is a place when I get done with work, I have a place to go sit down, relax, have my own quiet time, whatever, be able to fix my own food, I can pay my own bills. That's home to me.
Home is like if you wrapped yourself in a nice warm comforter when it was cold outside. That's home.
I feel
safe, where I feel comfortable. It could be anywhere. It doesn't really matter.
And what does home mean to you?
Home means heaven.
Having a place over my head, a roof over my head.
A place that's dry and warm. Whatever you make it.
The one word that I would use for home is probably safety.
Home for me would be some place I go to every day, sleep, take a shower, that I wouldn't have to worry about finding a place to sleep every night.
Home is wherever I'm with the ones I love and the ones love me. It really doesn't care like where that is.
It's safety. Number one, it's comfort, and it's kind of like what you know.
Wherever I lay down at night, wherever I lay down at night, that would be home to me.
It doesn't have to be a physical place. It can be the people you're with or the experience you're having, but describing it's pretty hard.
Home means security to me, because a large portion of the world, of the United States, will never know what it's like to not have a roof over your head. And I think a lot of people take advantage of that. To not know where you're gonna lay down is like the most frightening thing in the world.
What does home mean to you?
Sanctuary, place of rest.
See, now, I haven't had a home since my wife died. See, when me and her were together, she made it a home. Love and family, that's what a home is to me. Yeah.
But home to me was where Mom was there, eating dinner, But as of right now, home is Clinton Bridge. That's where I sleep, underneath Clinton Bridge.
To me, a home is I can put a key in a door, open it and go inside and relax, take a shower, watch TV, sleep in a bed. That's home to me.
Home to me would be one day somewhere I can call my own. That's what home would mean to me. Right now, home is wherever I can sleep.
Home to me is like pretty much where my friends are at, where my family's at, because we don't have a sense of home, so home is our family, wherever we are together. When I lay my head next to him at night, that's home to me.
Home for me is that feeling of, I don't know how to say this in English, but it's literally like feeling physically and spiritually. It's feeling love, happiness, and calmness all at the same time. Like they cannot live without each other.
So you may have noticed that Eddie answered that question when I asked him that in Philly, and he said that it was where he lays his head down at night. Yesterday, I texted Eddie and I said, hey man, I haven't asked you this question in a long time, but I want you to know now, in the place you are now, what is home now? And he wrote back a really long answer, and a couple of things stood out in his answer, but one was the word sanctuary. And he talked about how now some of his friends that are trying to get sober, he provides a couch for them. And I could sense how different that question was for Eddie. But it's people like Eddie that have taught me that it's not us and them, that it is just us. And if there's one big takeaway that this project has taught me, it's that I am reminded daily that whatever the other person is, whatever they look like, wherever they are, whatever they smell like, whatever their sign says, that's just another human being who's asking for help. And there have been plenty of times in my life when I've had to ask for help. So thank you for having me.